Welcome to Psychology Kitchen Table Talks. Today's podcast is about trauma-informed attachment-aware schools, also known as TIASS. And I have here with me today Maxine Bedward from the Orchards Primary Academy School here in Birmingham, and Dr Annie Kent, educational psychologist and TIASS lead in Birmingham EPS. So I'd like to thank you both for joining me. I'm really looking forward to delving into this topic around TIASS and what it looks like in your school, Maxine. But can you start off just by giving us a bit of an introduction as to who you are, what your role is?
Okay, I'm Dr Maxine Bedward and I'm a SENCO Inclusion and TIASS lead at the Orchards Primary Academy. I work there 2 days a week. I often work in other schools, so I'm also placed in another school at the moment outside of Birmingham as a SENCO. Interesting enough that school was interested in my role as a TIASS lead.
Yeah.
And but I've been doing that. I first became a SENCO in 2006, so it's a role I'm quite familiar with. And the principles of that role influenced my own practice, hence my own personal study to get my PhD, looking at a relationship-driven pedagogy as opposed to teaching and learning to test. So I wanted to celebrate immeasurable outcomes as opposed to measurable outcomes, although the two are good bedfellows as far as I'm concerned. So I think with that background, you can understand how something like TIASS was very appealing to me and something that, you know, I wanted to pioneer in my school.
Amazing. It's so great to hear about your further study in PhD as well. You've got lots of different plates that you're spinning at the same time. But yeah, I can see that your interest in TIASS would come from that, wouldn't it? Annie, tell us a bit about yourself and why TIASS is important to you.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Annie Kent. So I'm an educational psychologist working in the south of Birmingham. And as you said, Kieran, one of the lead practitioners for trauma-informed attachment-aware schools programme that the EPS delivers in Birmingham. From a personal perspective, I've always had a real interest in empathy, and that really fits with emotion coaching, as we'll kind of hopefully touch on today, and also how we can move away from traditional behaviourist approaches to managing behaviour in schools, and understanding how we can foster positive relationships and how that is the foundation for everything: behaviour change, learning, helping children to develop their emotional regulation, mental health. So that idea of relationships is really, really important to me, and is often something that I talk about in my work. Just to set the scene a little, I thought I'd just explain what trauma-informed attachment-aware schools is as a programme. So TIASS is a 3-year curriculum for schools, which involves direct training delivered by the Educational Psychology Service. But then it's more than just training, it's about ongoing support from our service, and some schools have support from the virtual schools team. And it's really about developing schools' practice over 3 years so that they can become what we call trauma-informed attachment-aware settings. So I had the pleasure of supporting Maxine at the Orchards on their journey towards being a TIASS school, and sort of observing the changes that happen within their setting to become more attachment aware and more trauma informed. The training itself is on topics like obviously trauma, adverse childhood experiences, positive childhood experiences, attachment theory, and emotion coaching. So an emotion coaching is a relational approach to supporting children with their emotions and also the way that they communicate that through their behaviour. It also focuses on things like key adult support in schools and supporting children with transition and change, which we know can often be difficult for some children with attachment needs. So as I said, they have the training, they also have development, ongoing support from our service. And as part of that, there's opportunities to network with other schools. So Maxine will have experienced this, sort of meeting other TIASS settings, sharing good practice, learning more in your professional development from topics like therapeutic approaches for children, psychoeducation, but also what we really want to kind of move towards is supporting parents with this work as well. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a background to what TIASS is, and what we're going to be talking about today, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I love that it's kind of that 3-year journey, and that's kind of really individual to each school, isn't it? That might go on to becoming trauma informed and attachment aware. And it is that, isn't it, that journey? And Maxine, I was hoping you'd kind of touch on what that's been like in your schools. What has your TIASS journey been like?
Yeah, the TIASS journey has provided a supportive framework for developing your trauma-informed attachment-aware learning environment. But it goes beyond the formal. It's very holistic. And, at the heart of it is promoting well-being for everyone within the school community. For me, it's a pedagogy that is very much connected. It's about connected knowing, not just about compartmentalizing things in discrete areas. It's bringing everything together, and hence, networking is very important. And not only do you meet up with other schools that are on that journey, but part of the package is membership in the first year only, I believe, is to the attachment research community. Yeah. So that is a really good way to get everyone on board and buying into the package, because it takes that time of reflection of where you're at and where your aspirations are to develop, but in a meaningful way that reflects your context. I think that is so important, and for me, why I think it's been successful at the Orchards, because it's not about the school trying to fit into the program. It's how the program supports the school in meeting the needs of its school population and moving forward from a sound foundation that is beyond the measurable. It is bringing inclusion and high standards together. And what I love, it's a person-centered approach. So it really supports all the work that has gone on within inclusion prior to the development of TIASS. About those principles, getting back to those principles of a person-centered approach as articulated by Carl Rogers, the American clinical psychologist. That's what I hold on to with all my practice is, to be empathic, like Annie said earlier, to be genuine as well, building genuine relationships with your colleagues, with your pupils and their families, and anyone else, other stakeholders. So being genuine and being non-judgmental in your regard. So Annie mentioned about the emotion coaching that we received as well, and I think what is really key about that is getting across to everyone, the whole school, the importance of accepting people as they are, as whole human beings, and feelings are very much a part of our identity. So rather than looking at uncomfortable feelings as being sort of bad and negative, we don't talk about that. And we just really concentrate on the more comfortable feelings and trying to promote that. No, it's recognizing we all have feelings and we need to accept the feelings we have. We need to learn to recognize them, identify, show our empathy that, this is a human condition. We all go through that. And, and at times we need help through it. And, that really comes. So again, it's about promoting connections with one another by building real, authentic relationships and moving forward, and not to see problems as something you dismiss, emotions as problems that to be dismissed because they make you feel uncomfortable, but really providing everyone with the tools to move towards, to prevail, to persevere, and move to greater resilience and as a sound foundation.
Yeah, and it sounds like when you say everyone, you've really embedded that in the ethos of the school community.
Yeah, and the audit tool that the Attachment Research Council has, you know, because it recognises everyone's at different starting points. You know, we're not some sort of universal, uniform blob. This is where we all are. It varies, but it allows that for you to look. You know, you have a 5-point scale where you sort of you know, can break down into, you know, say 40% of your staff you'd see at being quite competent at this level. You know, 20% may not know a lot. It could be even more, 60% don't, but how you can move forward from that. And that's what I really like about that tool. So you can, you know, have an honest, there's no judgment. It's not tied to anything like that. It's about self-reflection as a community. And how you can move forward. So one of the things that I did was do the audit as a Senko, and I was a new Senko and I joined the orchards. I'm coming to the end of my 3rd year, and I did this in my 1st year I was there in 2019, so a year before COVID. You know, where it's popular now to acknowledge that well-being and mental health are really important. But, you know, some of us entered that journey, enter the COVID already with a deep understanding of that. And then how you can move forward. So when I did the audit, it really highlighted the need to develop our key working. But I also got SLT to do it, and that highlighted the need for supervision, staff supervision, because, you know, how can you promote the well-being of children and their families when the well-being of your staff aren't? And if they're truly empathic and they're really taking on board the perspective and the feelings, the emotions that someone is going through when they're being traumatized or when they're dealing with anxiety linked to separation, you know, and if you really take that on board rather than, I don't know, as a tick list or something you're detached from, you're not connected to, then that's going to limit the impact you have to help build resilience in that child and their families. And so if you're truly connected, then that is a lot to be carrying without getting support for yourself, you know. So that came out as an important area for development. And then rather than seeing it as a problem that you could be overwhelmed by, you know, what this whole program is really shown is that, you know, when you face obstacles together, issues together, you can find a solution. You know, you get other perspective to say, rather, you know, your coping strategy may help you cope, but it may not actually be in the long run the best thing for you or others. But together, when you look at the any issues that arise and you look at it together, you find alternatives. And that's what the emotion coaching does on the smaller level with kids. You know, they've got their coping strategies, you know, fight, flight response, it could be. But you know, you recognize those emotions and you set boundaries, you know, about keeping everyone safe and healthy, but come up with a solution with that and equip children, their families with the tools, you know, to address the issues that are really at the heart of their behaviours and their feelings and move forward.
It's not just about the children and young people, is it, Maxine? It's about everyone in the school community, like you said, and it is a whole school development journey, really. And it does, I think what's great about it is it offers you as adults in schools, you're better equipped to deal with your own emotions, I think, through this journey, and to be able to regulate yourselves so you can then support the young people. And I think that's what coming across from the staff in your school, that's what they've valued about it, I think.
I know definitely in my schools, some of the feedback I've had is that the Senko has heard the staff using emotion coaching with each other. And it's given that space and time for connection and conversations about just the impact of life and especially right now with the pandemic and how that has impacted everybody. So in terms of kind of the TIASS journey, you're working towards your goal, or is that right? Certification.
In March, the end of March, just before we broke up for the Easter holidays, the school was accredited with the Silver Award, which, given that this is like a 3-year program, to see that we've done that in our 2nd year, and a good part of 1 year has been school closures and heightened need, is quite remarkable, to be honest. And that genuinely proud of what we've been able to do. They say together each achieves more. That's what teamwork is, and I think that has shown.
And what about the pupils then? I know, Annie, you've done some work with Pupil Voice. What are they kind of saying or learning from this TIASS approach and ethos in the school?
Yeah, so as part of the TIASS journey, there is certification, and as part of that, schools can achieve bronze, silver or gold depending on kind of criteria that they're meeting at the time of looking at certification, and that process does involve sort of talking to the kids, and I sort of had the pleasure of talking to the kids at the Orchards Academy, and what I was hearing from them really was that they were much more in tune with how they were feeling, and I know sort of from the work you do, Maxine, it's about helping them to link what's going on around them, what they're feeling sort of physically. So, my face looks like I'm frowning, I'm sad, with those kind of verbal labels, and then sort of knowing what to do about it. And I think from the children I spoke to, there were safe spaces that they could go to. There were things that they could practice to kind of help them to regulate themselves. So I definitely think that they understand more now kind of why they feel the way they do, what that means for them, and then how they can regulate it. You use a lot of photographs, don't you, Maxine, of showing the children when they're feeling an emotion to sort of help them to link that experience with what they're feeling.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've done work around visual literacy skills, media skills and that. And sometimes when you're in the moment, when you're in fight, flight mode, you don't realize how your body is betraying what's going on for you at that time. You may think everything is calm. The plasticity of the brain is just wonderful, but it also means it can make sense out of nonsense, but your body never lies. You can be saying, yeah, I'm fine. And, your legs go in, there's a little twitch or whatever. Your body will always betray the truth about how you're really feeling. And I think being attuned to the signs as well, because behavior is a form of communication. So, adults, much less children, don't always know the words to express how they're feeling, what they're going through at the moment, but their behavior will betray them. But that usually gets our attention. But rather than trying to manage that behavior, it's about supporting that behavior and feeling yourself equipped to be able to support them, rather than, your own fight, flight response kicks in. That has been really good, actually. So using photographs with children to help them see what they're communicating through their behaviors. But another thing that Annie and I have developed, and it's not about reinventing the wheel, it's about trying to update and adapt what's already out there to work for you. So the ABC charts, I know that's been around for some time, particularly around children, understanding the behaviours of children with autism. We developed that to a trauma-informed approach, in terms of we made more explicit initially what are the driving emotions behind that behaviour, you know, really encouraging staff to look at it in that, not just list the behaviours, not just what came before it or the consequences, but what do we think was the driving emotion for that child. So it became the ABCDE chart for driving
really good.
emotions. And then with reflection, you know, the support you get on the TIASS program from your TIASS lead within the EP service has been tremendous. So we you know, practice what we preach. We problem solve together rather than feeling overwhelmed by things, you know, lighting candles rather than cursing the darkness. And then it was like, but how we respond also can reflect what's driving our own emotions. So to be really honest, be authentic and genuine. How are you feeling in that moment when you're faced with these behaviours? Some very challenging behaviours. Let's not underestimate it. You know, the kids are angels. They're human beings like everyone else, and they come with normal families, and we're normal human beings. But it's raising that awareness so we can work together.
It sounds amazing.
Sorry, it's linking the start. It's viewing it as the whole picture. It's not just about the child presenting with a behaviour. We know that there's more that they're communicating in their terms of their emotions, but it's also the bigger picture, because it's the environment that they're in. It's how the staff are feeling that day, how the other children are feeling that day. That helps us really to know what's going on to drive that.
It sounds like it's really important work, and it just sounds like you know it's embedded within within the approach of the kind of hierarchy you get in schools. You know, you've got your senior leadership team right down to your staff, your teaching assistants, your lunchtime supervisors, and it's having a real impact on the way relationships are kind of prioritized, which is really important in this time, you know, when kids have spent quite a lot of time out of school and kind of in a fear-based mode with the pandemic and lots of things out there. If you just look at the news, to need to go away and do some mindful breathing somewhere. But in terms of, there's lots of other schools kind of on their TIASS journey, and you know, I'd really like to, for other schools that might listen and hear this podcast, to go away with some kind of top tips that they might be able to kind of think about in their individual schools. So Maxine, Annie, whoever wants to go first, do you have any kind of top tips for other schools in Birmingham that are maybe at their early kind of stages of their TIASS journey?
I think for me it's something you have to commit to, isn't it, Maxine? And because it is a whole school development programme, the whole school has to be committed to it. And I think sometimes schools are such busy places, there's so much pressure on staff to get academic outcomes, and I think sometimes that becomes the priority. And I think what Maxine does and what the Orchards are moving towards is recognising that you have to have that emotional well-being and regulation as a foundation for then the learning in the classroom. And so it's almost about taking a step back and thinking, what's our priorities for a child who might be really struggling emotionally? Well, actually, let's help them to feel calmer, let's help them to feel regulated, and then we will see those kind of learning outcomes after. So yeah, commitment is definitely one, and recognising that the value of it with the other outcomes that you want in schools as well, I'd say would be another. Maxine, have you got any top tips?
I think the key thing is that it has to be a whole school approach, a whole community, you know, and certainly the leadership within that school has to, you know, take on that responsibility to make that commitment to go through it. And one of the things I think that really makes that easier for us to make those connections and work together as a team is the audit tool that the Attachment Research Council provides. And, you know, I sort of think of the short space of time that we have gone from not being anywhere near accreditation for TIASS to achieving a silver award. And I think that audit tool really helped to accelerate our journey. And it was very timely because we've been able to deal with the impacts of the pandemic quite effectively, really. I'm not saying it hasn't impacted on us, and I haven't seen caseload increase and, you know, anxiety levels rise generally, but it's not the presence of the anxiety, it's how you respond to it. And the toolkit helped us to see that key working was an area that we needed to address if we were going to meet those unmet trauma and attachment needs within our school community. And it must have pinpoint. I mean, as a SENCO, I do my audits, and I can't say I necessarily saw it as that as being the key thing. I was a bit like, this needs doing, that needs doing, that needs doing, and feeling a little overwhelmed. But after doing the audit by myself, you know, talking to staff and things like it, but it came from my perspective, key working came out, but we also did it as a senior leadership team.
Yeah. Do you mean key working, key adults? Is that what do you mean? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I say about key adults to get away from like the idea that it's about one-to-one adult support. No, you're using your adult to do key bits of work, be that key person, that trusted individual in that child's life to build that relationship. Yeah. And that came out. But the need for staff supervision, the job has changed so much since I started. I won't tell you how long ago, you know, and I realised we also need to have support to deal with the impact on our own mental health and well-being. And that came out. And as far as I'm concerned, it must have been quite insightful, you know, uncover some blind spots, shall we say, because it gave us a focus that we could all commit to then and come up with a programme that fitted our setting. And it must have been pretty good for us to, you know, in such a short space of time, given schools have been closed for the best part of a year, that, you know, for us to reach that level of recognition with the TIASS accreditation. So I'd strongly recommend being part of that attachment research community, just so that you get you can have a strategic approach, person-centered but strategic, because we've got limited resources and we don't want an approach that's going to overwhelm.
And that's something you said, Maxine, is that you do the audits, and I think that regular reviewing is really important, and not viewing it as something that you have to just turn around overnight. I think you've got a very rational view of this being a development program, and even, you know, you've reached silver now, but that's not the end. There's always kind of key areas for development, and so looking at it as a journey rather than, you know, we're going to have this training and that's it. We'll have the skills to be able to overcome the issues we face. It's not about that. It's about what can we develop over time.
Yeah,
definitely.
And it hits things at all the different levels, you know, coming as a SENCO and you're looking at the 3 tiers of SEND support: universal, targeted and specialist. This is an approach just for those that require enhanced support. It's for the universal. And what I found, okay, with the pandemic, you know, the number of our school population experiencing trauma and attachment issues has increased, or the level of it has, you know, deepened, shall we say, become more enhanced. But what I found, our starting point has also shifted. So what might be enhanced support in one school is now universal. You know, this isn't like a consultation with the Senko that this child might need meet and greet. That was, you know, one way we delivered on the key working. You know, I only work part-time and I can come in and there's been an issue. But when I ask what have we, you know, what's been tried and that, they've already put in place meet and greet for this child that's gone through a particular crisis, an episode. You know, they don't need the Senko to say that. That's our starting point now. You know, given that in April 2019, that was our developmental goal. It's been a remarkable journey, how it's shifting the culture to be more trauma informed, attachment aware.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I think we've naturally come to the kind of aims of this podcast that we initially wanted to kind of achieve. And I think both Maxine and Annie, you've given a really succinct overview exactly on how TIASS, what TIASS is, and how TIASS can really shift, change, and develop school culture and teaching children in really complex times, especially now. So thank you both for coming on and spending time to do this podcast with me. I've really enjoyed hearing lots about it, and now I'm going to book my visit to the orchard and come and see what's going on. But yes, thank you both.
Thank you, Kieran. It's been nice to share all the lovely things that are going on.
Yeah, it's a great way to promote what is happening and what's really important to take place, you know, for our communities. So thank you.
Thank you.